The dust storm rolled down the valley like a gray curtain, swallowing the sun whole and turning noon into something closer to dusk. Red earth lifted from the road in fixed spirals, stinging the eyes and coating everything it touched. By the time it reached the small wooden chapel at Dry Hollow Creek, the sky had gone the color of tarnished steel. Seraphina Brooks stood at the chapel doors, her breath steady despite the wind clawing at her veil. She was a black woman of generous curves and quiet strength, her presence impossible to miss even in a room built to make people feel small. The wedding dress clung to her body in careful lines, simple, modest, and hand-stitched from her late mother's gown. She had taken it apart and rebuilt it 3 times, not to hide herself, but to make space for who she was. Every grain of dust seemed to find her hair, her shoulders, the soft folds of fabric at her waist. She did not brush it away. Beside her stood her father, Isaiah Brooks, his once straight back bent beneath years of drought and debt. He had sold nearly everything, land, cattle, tools, everything except the small house at the edge of town and the pride that had kept him upright through harder seasons than this. Today, even that pride felt thin. Across the narrow aisle waited the man the town whispered about, Jonah Blackwell. They called him the Iron Rancher, half in awe, half in fear. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the chapel without effort. Road dust coated his long coat. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, jaw set, eyes unreadable. He had lived alone since the night his first wife died in a stable fire 3 years ago, burned so badly, people said, that nothing recognizable was left behind. No one asked why he wanted to marry again. In Dry Hollow, curiosity survived only when it threatened survival. The preacher cleared his throat, his voice thin against the wind that whistled through the chapel walls like restless spirits. "We are gathered here." Seraphina listened, but the words slid past her like dust on glass. She felt the weight of eyes pressing into her back. Some held pity, some judgment, some a quiet kind of hunger, the kind that fed on scandal. This marriage was not born of romance, everyone knew that. Her father's deaths had reached Jonah Blackwell's ledger, and Jonah had made an offer no bank would: clear the debt, save the Brooks name, and take a wife in return. A lawful arrangement, clean, final. The preacher turned to Jonah. "Do you, Jonah Blackwell, take this woman to be your lawful wife?" Jonah did not hesitate. "I do." His voice was low, steady, unadorned, no tremor, no flourish. The preacher turned to Seraphina. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the gravity of the moment. She thought of her mother's hands guiding her needle, of her father's bowed shoulders, of the whispers that had followed her through town, too big, too much, too desperate. She lifted her chin. "I do," she said. The words landed like stones in still water. There was no applause, no blessing called down, only the wind, the grit, and the hollow sound of the chapel door slamming shut behind them as the storm raged on. The wagon ride to Iron Ridge Ranch passed in silence. Seraphina sat upright, her veil snagged on her collar, hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not fix the veil. Through the wooden slats, the prairie stretched endless and unforgiving, a sea of dust and dry grass bending under the wind. Her father's land was gone now. The debt belonged to the man holding the reins. Jonah said nothing, his hands rough, scarred, gripping the leather tight enough to whiten his knuckles. The horses strained forward, eager to be free of the storm. When the wagon finally stopped, Seraphina looked up. Iron Ridge Ranch rose before her, large, solid, and cold. The main house stood quiet, its windows dark. To the side, the old stable loomed, blackened scars still etched deep into the wood, like a wound the land refused to forget.
"You'll stay here," Jonah said flatly as he helped her down. "East room's been cleaned, food's in the kitchen. I won't be home for supper." Serafina nodded. No questions, no protest. Inside, the house echoed. Her small trunk landed on the floor with a dull thud that seemed to travel through every empty room. Night fell fast, as if the sun itself feared the place. Wind threaded through the cracks in the walls, carrying the smell of dust and old smoke. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring on her finger. Plain gold, no names engraved, no promises carved into it. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. The door opened. Jonah stood there, sleeves rolled up, hands dark with soot from the forge. His gaze passed over her, her full hips, her strong arms, the quiet dignity in her posture, not with hunger nor disdain, but with something restrained and careful. "Not tonight, ma'am. You need rest. I'll sleep on the porch." For a moment, Serafina forgot how to breathe. The man she had just vowed to obey stepped back instead. The door closed softly, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke and leather. Outside, the storm howled louder. Serafina rose and went to the window, drawing back the curtain. Under the dim moon, she saw his shadow on the porch, sitting still, a cigarette ember glowing faintly in the dark as he stared towards the burned stable. They said he felt nothing, but in that moment she saw the weight in his back, the quiet ache of a man carrying too much solitude. She shut the lamp. In the cold wooden house, the new bride fell asleep to the sound of wind crying through the cracks, unaware that the man outside, unmoving beneath the storm, had already decided this marriage would not begin with taking, but with restraint. And somewhere between two wounded souls, something unseen took root, silent and hidden, like a seed buried deep in dust, waiting for rain.
3 weeks passed at Iron Ridge Ranch, and the house learned Serafina Brooks's footsteps before it learned her voice. Each morning she woke in the east room to the low groan of the windmill turning against a sky that never seemed to rest. Its sound carried across the barren fields like a tired breath drawn in and let out again, over and over, as if the land itself were trying not to give up. Jonah Blackwell was already gone by dawn. She learned his habits by absence, the coffee pot left warm, the door latched quietly, the dust of fresh hoofprints leading west into the valley. He returned only after sunset, his silhouette passing the windows without pause, his presence felt more than seen. When he was home, he ate on the porch, quick, silent, as if company might slow him down or ask questions he had no intention of answering. With Serafina, he was not unkind. He spoke when necessary, his words careful and sparse, like a man rationing water in the desert. The meals he did not share were brought by Agnes Prowley, the ranch's long-serving housekeeper. The old woman moved with a shuffle, one eye clouded and unblinking, the other sharp enough to notice everything. She set trays down without comment and disappeared again, leaving behind the quiet clink of cutlery and the faint smell of stew. Sometimes Jonah left things on the table for Serafina, an old Bible with a cracked spine, a shawl folded neatly after a cold night. Once, a short note written in a firm, restrained hand. "The window leaks. I'll fix it before night." 8 words, no greeting, no signature. Yet Serafina held the paper longer than necessary, her thumb tracing the crease. It felt like warmth entering a room that had long forgotten how to keep it. In the wide, echoing house, the wind was her most faithful companion. It threaded through the boards, slipped under doors, and whispered at night like voices that refused to sleep. Sometimes, when the loneliness pressed too close, Serafina stood at the window and let it tangle her hair, grounding herself in its insistence. On the 14th day, she was washing her hands at the kitchen basin when Agnes muttered from the hearth, "They still talk in town."
Serafina did not look up. She had learned that silence often invited more truth than questions. "Say you're a fool. Say the master's a devil wearing a man's skin." The flames flickered, throwing light across the old woman's lined face. "Don't mind them. Folks around here need stories. Helps them forget their own." Later, that afternoon, Serafina rode into town for salt and flour. Eyes followed her from the mercantile to the saloon porch. A young woman at the counter leaned close, whispering, "Is it true? Did he really?" "No," Serafina said, her voice steady. She walked out before the question could finish itself. Yet as she mounted the wagon, doubt curled quietly in her chest, unwelcome and persistent. That evening, as the sun bled red behind the ridges, Serafina went to the well and saw Jonah standing near the old burned stable. He was not working, not repairing, just standing there, hat in his hand, staring at the blackened boards as if they might answer him. "You come here every night?" she asked when he turned. He nodded once. "It reminds me of what can't be forgotten." She wanted to ask more. The words rose, then settled back into silence as he walked away, leaving behind the smell of ash and the memory of his shoulders set under an invisible weight. That night, sleep refused her. She opened one of the Bibles Jonah had left behind. Between two brittle pages lay a pressed gray flower, dry and fragile. Beneath it, written in careful ink, was a single line: "Forgive what the fire couldn't." Serafina sat there for a long time, holding the flower between her fingers, trying to imagine the man who had written those words. The iron rancher the town feared did not match the quiet grief pressed into that page. The next morning, rain came. The first rain of the season fell soft and steady, drawing out the deep scent of wet earth and hay. Serafina hung laundry beneath the porch roof, watching the fields drink it in. Jonah loaded feed sacks onto the wagon, his movements efficient, practiced. He glanced at her once, then away. When the wagon rolled out, she noticed something left on the table, a worn leather glove and a folded note. "The window leaks. I'll fix it before night." No flourish, no apology, just a promise kept before it was even asked for. By evening, the sound of hammering echoed through the rain. Serafina sat by the window, the lamplight catching Jonah's face as he worked, jaw tight, eyes focused. When he drove the final nail, he looked up and caught her gaze. A quiet nod passed between them. He turned away without a word. The door closed, and Serafina realized something then, sitting alone in the softened glow of lamplight. This house was not built of wood. It was built of silence. Not the kind that smothered or punished, but the kind that listened, the kind that made space for wounds to breathe without being forced open. That night, she was not afraid. Outside, Jonah sat beneath the porch roof, a cigarette unlit between his fingers, staring towards the east room where her lamp glowed faintly through the rain-streaked glass. In a world ruled by rumor and noise, perhaps silence was the only way left to keep what was human from being torn apart. And in that shared quiet, something fragile and unspoken began to take shape. Not trust yet, not love, but the first careful understanding that two people could exist in the same space without demanding more than the other could give.
The rain passed, but the unease it uncovered did not. Dust Creek wore a cleaner face after the storm, streets darkened, air sharp with the smell of wet earth, but the whispers grew louder, not softer, as if the town needed moisture only to help old rumors take root again. Serafina Brooks felt it in the way conversations paused when she entered a room, in the way glances lingered too long, then slid away. Silence followed her like a shadow that belonged not to her, but to the man whose name she now carried. One afternoon, while Agnes kneaded dough at the kitchen table, she spoke without looking up. "There's a woman south of town,
Name's Lydia Vance, widow with money and a mouth that don't know when to rest." Seraphina dried her hand slowly. "What does she say?" Agnes's knuckles pressed hard into the dough. "Says she knew the master before the fire. Says he promised her things." She snorted softly. "Folks like her don't need proof, just an audience." Seraphina nodded, though her chest tightened. Jonah barely left the ranch. When supplies were needed, Agnes handled it. When business called, it came here. The idea of him courting another woman felt wrong, not impossible, but misplaced, like a story wearing the wrong skin. Still, doubt was patient. That evening, Seraphina went to the well as dusk painted the sky bruised purple. Jonah stood again near the old stable, hands braced on his hips, eyes fixed on the charred wood. "You hear the things they say?" she asked. He did not turn. "I hear enough." "And?" "A man can't rope every mouth that wants to run," he said quietly. "If I stopped for every lie told about me, I'd never move at all." He walked away before she could ask more, leaving her with the soft crackle of cooling timber and the faint smell of rain-soaked ash. That night, sleep came in fragments. When Seraphina rose to fetch water, she noticed a flicker of light near the barn. Curious, she drew her shawl tight and slipped quietly onto the porch. Two voices drifted through the boards. One was Jonah's. The other belonged to Marcus Hale, the Dust Creek banker. "You said the letters were burned. I want to see for myself," Marcus rasped. "Even if they're gone, this ends here," Jonah replied, voice low and firm. "Nothing ends until I get what I'm owed." The word letters settled in Seraphina's chest like a stone. A pause. Something slammed, wood against wood. "Get off my land," Jonah said sharply. "If you come back with threats, you won't leave walking." Bootsteps crunched on gravel. A lantern swung. Then only the wind remained. Seraphina crept back inside, her heart pounding. She sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her palms together until the trembling stopped. Letters. The next days sharpened her awareness. She began to notice who brought the mail, who lingered too long near the bank. Once, she saw a young runner hesitate before handing Agnes an envelope sealed with dark red wax. Later, searching for spare cloth in the pantry, her hand brushed against a loose board beneath the lowest drawer. She knelt and lifted it. Inside lay a small wooden box. Charred scraps of paper filled it, edges blackened, ink smeared, but still legible in places. "If you still remember your promise to me, don't let them find out." No name, but the handwriting was delicate, slanted, female. Seraphina replaced the box exactly as she found it, her mind racing. Jonah was not a careless man. If these fragments remained, it was because destroying them completely had cost him something. That evening, the post rider arrived again. This time, Seraphina took the letter herself. The seal bore the mark of a crow pressed into red wax. Inside, the message was brief and cruel. $3,000. Pay in 3 days, or the letters between you and Lydia Vance will be read aloud at church. Then they'll know why your wife died in the fire. Seraphina read it twice, then a third time. When Jonah returned at dusk, dust clinging to his shoulders, she placed the letter on the table without a word. He read it once, then again. His fingers trembled, just barely. "I didn't write those words," he said quietly. "But someone wants me to believe you did," Seraphina replied. He nodded. "You carry my name now. They think you're easier to break." Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. "I won't pay," Jonah said at last. "If they want to speak, let 'em. I won't trade the land for lies." That night, Seraphina watched him sit alone on the porch, cigarette burning down to ash. The letter lay inside, hidden in her drawer. And in that quiet, watching the man she barely knew refuse to defend himself against a town already convinced of his guilt, Serafina made a decision. If silence had protected him this long, then light, controlled, deliberate, would be her weapon. She would not confront him, she would observe. Count every letter, every visitor, every night he chose the porch over the house. Because something survived the fire, and the truth was time to stop hiding in ashes.
The morning broke pale and quiet, the kind of stillness that made even the wind hesitate. Serafina Brooks sat at the kitchen table with the black-sealed letter folded beneath her palm, its edges softened from being handled too many times. The crow pressed into the wax stared up at her like an accusation that refused to blink. Jonah Blackwell stood at the sink, washing his hands in silence. Soot streaked his wrists. The smell of iron and soap hung in the air between them. "If you want to leave," he said, without turning, voice low and steady, "I won't stop you." Serafina looked at his back, the rigid line of his shoulders, the careful distance he kept, as though he were trying not to burden her with his presence. "No," she said, one word, certain. "If I leave, they win, and you stay the monster they made you." He turned then, slowly, studying her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a solution to debt, not as a wife arranged by circumstance, but as a woman standing firm on her own ground. "Then what do you plan to do?" he asked. Serafina unfolded the letter and smoothed it flat. "Step into the light," she said. "They're counting on you to stay silent. I won't." She took out a fresh sheet of paper and dipped the pen. Her handwriting was deliberate, calm, each word chosen with care. "A harvest gathering at Iron Ridge Ranch," she wrote. "A chance to mend misunderstandings. All are welcome." At the bottom she wrote a single name, Lydia Vance. Jonah watched her in silence. "You think she'll come?" he asked. "She lives on attention," Serafina replied. "If there's a crowd, she'll be here." "And me?" "You stay quiet," she said gently. "I'll do the talking." Something shifted in Jonah's expression. Not relief, not fear, but the faintest edge of awe. He nodded once. That afternoon, Serafina rode into town to post the invitation. People watched her pass, some openly now. She held her chin high, handed the letter over, and walked out without explanation. By dusk, the ranch began to change. Serafina swept the porch, scrubbed the long wooden table, and placed jars of wildflowers along its length. She tied a white ribbon at the gate, not a celebration, but a signal, welcome without surrender. Jonah worked in the barn, hammer striking wood in steady rhythm. He said nothing, but his eyes followed her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. The silence between them no longer pressed, it held. The next day, the town came. Wagons rolled in, horses were tied along the fence. Neighbors gathered in clusters, curiosity pulling them closer than kindness ever had. Serafina greeted each one with calm politeness, her voice even, her smile measured. Jonah stood behind her, silent and unyielding as the posts that held up the porch roof. Near sunset, a black carriage rolled up to the gate. Lydia Vance stepped out, draped in scarlet velvet, perfume thick enough to announce her before she spoke. Beside her stood Marcus Hale, the banker, his jaw tight, eyes sharp. The crowd hushed. "Mrs. Vance," Serafina said warmly, "thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it. I hear Iron Ridge is lively these days." She waited until the murmurs settled. Then she placed 2 letters on the table. "One of these," she said calmly, "is the blackmail letter sent to my home 2 weeks ago. The other was written by someone who once worked in Mrs. Vance's household." She let the silence stretch.
Both were examined by Reverend Collins. Same handwriting, same hand. Lydia's smile faltered. Serafina turned to the crowd. There was also a witness who saw Mrs. Vance give the sealed envelope to Mr. Hale at the bank the morning it was sent. Gasps rippled. Marcus stepped forward. "This is absurd." "Then explain the seal," Serafina said softly, lifting the crow-marked wax for all to see, "and explain why you demanded payment for silence." Lydia's composure cracked. "I wanted him humbled," she snapped. "He let people believe I didn't want her." "And you," Jonah said quietly, finally stepping forward, "let people believe I killed my wife." Marcus's face drained of color. Voices rose, accusations flew. Then Lydia broke. "He told me to do it," she cried, pointing at Marcus. "He said he'd make sure the whole town heard it." The truth stood naked in the open air. When it was over, Lydia fled. Marcus followed, shouts trailing behind them. The crowd dispersed slowly. Shame settled where gossip once lived. Jonah turned to Serafina. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," she said gently, "I did." That night, under a pale moon, music rose, hesitant, uncertain. Jonah offered his hand. "I don't know how to dance," he said. "I'll lead," Serafina replied. His touch at her waist was careful, reverent, and it left her breathless, not just from desire, but from the realization that she had just changed both their lives by refusing to stay silent. The Iron Rancher was no longer standing alone in the dark, and neither was she.
Spring arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch with a gentleness that felt almost apologetic, as if the land itself remembered the seasons of cruelty it had forced upon those who worked it. Snowmelt ran thin and clear through the low channels near the ridge, and the fields that had once lain gray and brittle began to stir with faint green life. Serafina Brooks stood on the porch one morning, arms folded loosely around herself, breathing in the scent of thawed earth. Below her, Jonah Blackwell worked the soil, sleeves rolled, hoe resting against his shoulder as he paused to wipe sweat from his brow. Sunlight caught the scar near his temple, a pale line she had come to recognize as proof not of violence, but survival. News traveled slowly in Dust Creek, but it always arrived. Lydia Vance sold her house within a month and left town before the gossip could finish chewing on her name. Marcus Hale lost his position at the bank when his forged documents surfaced, debts manipulated, letters falsified, lies layered carefully until they collapsed under their own weight. No one spoke of him in the saloon anymore. Silence had finally found the right person. Jonah took no pleasure in any of it. "The land doesn't care who was right," he said once, driving a post into the softened earth. "It only grows for those willing to start again." Serafina carried those words with her as she began traveling twice a week toward the Canyon Pass, where a small one-room schoolhouse stood waiting. 12 children came at first, some barefoot, some shy, all curious. She taught them letters and numbers, but more than that, she taught them how to hold their heads up when the world tried to press them down. In the afternoons, Jonah often came to fetch her. He waited by the old oak with his horse, watching quietly as she wiped chalk from the board. The wind carried children's laughter down the trail, light and unafraid. One evening, walking home beside him, Serafina said, "I thought I married you to save my father." Jonah glanced. "And now?" "And now I know I was saving myself." He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Then we both got something we needed." Together, they decided not to stay in the old house. The stable shadow still lay too long across it. Instead, they built a smaller home near the creek. 2 rooms, low roof, windows facing the water. Jonah worked with hammer and saw. Serafina carried boards, held beams steady, and planned where the light would fall in winter. When the final wall rose, Serafina walked to the place where the old stable had once stood. She knelt, pressing her hands into the soil, and planted a sprig of rosemary she had carried wrapped in cloth. "For remembrance," she said softly. "For peace," Jonah replied, resting a hand on her shoulder. That night they sat on the porch of the new house as rain fell thin and gentle. The scent of pine and fresh wood filled the air. Serafina leaned against him. "Do you remember the first night here?" she asked. "I slept on the porch," he said, "and I thought I had married a ghost." He smiled. "I was half one." She turned to him then. "Your touch that night, when you stepped back, it stayed with me. I'd never been chosen like that." Jonah's hand found hers, warm and steady. I didn't want to take anything that wasn't freely given. This time, when he drew her close, there was no hesitation. His touch was still careful, still reverent, but now it held certainty. It left her speechless, not from surprise, but from the deep, quiet knowing that she was safe. Summer followed, generous and bright. The fields grew thick with barley. Birds nested beneath the eaves. The new house filled with laughter, shared meals, and the easy rhythm of two people who had learned how to listen. On the table inside, a wooden sign rested, freshly carved. Iron Ridge Ranch, rebuilt. No year, no boast, just truth. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, Serafina stood at the doorway watching Jonah wash his hands at the basin, the firelight softening the lines of his face. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me build this with you, not after you." Jonah crossed the room and kissed her forehead, gentle and deliberate. "You can't build a home out of ashes," he said, "but you taught me how to grow something where the fire once burned." Night settled over the land. Crickets sang. The creek murmured its steady song. From the ridge above, Iron Ridge Ranch glowed with lamplight, small, warm, and whole. And in Dust Creek, people said the Iron Rancher had bent at last, not to fire, not to rumor, but to love freely given, and a woman strong enough to believe in him when all they had left was dust and trust.